PowerPoint?
Am I not sharing my screen already?
I don't know.
Yes, I'm seeing Debbie's screen right now.
All right.
Okay. So my only problem is that I cannot open up the chat window. Oh, wait, there it is. Okay, it was hiding under something else. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So evaluation matters. As T just said, we're going to be talking about what is evaluation, why it matters that we're doing our program evaluation, and then we'll talk a little bit about evidence, and we're going to talk specifically more about survey type of evaluations and writing good questions. T's gonna delve deeply into how to write good questions. So what is evaluation? When we're talking about evaluation, we are looking for some type of evidence, and then we take that evidence and we place some type of value upon it. And that's what we call evaluation. So why is it important that we're evaluating? I have a nice little quote from Reinventing Government. In an accountability era, what gets measured gets done. If you don't measure results, you can't tell success from failure. If you can't see success, then you can't reward it. If you can't reward success, you're probably rewarding failure. If you can't see success, you can't learn from it. If you can't recognize failure, then you can't correct it. If you demonstrate results, you can win public support. And we see this in extension. We try to share our impacts of our programming with our stakeholders in our communities so that we can continue to get support for our programming. So what are some reasons for evaluating in non-formal education? If you could just take a second in the chat window and give us some ideas of why you would want to evaluate your programs. And again, my chat window has disappeared. So if anybody wants to read out, there it is. Okay, so impact for grant funding, demonstrating our impact, personal development, a lot of great ideas here. Reporting to stakeholders, find what it is we really need to deliver to our community, make our programs better. These are all great ideas, and pretty much what I had on my slide here. So we do it for needs assessment. We need to figure out what the community needs and what type of programming we should be delivering. To improve our instructions, either to improve the program itself or to improve our teaching of that program and delivery of content. To serve as a learning tool, what is it that we can, how can we change our program to make the program better? Also to document the learning, to see what our participants are getting out of the program as far as knowledge and maybe awareness, and then documenting the impact of that program. So what types of changes are happening in those longer term changes in condition might be happening. So this slide might be a little bit difficult to see, but basically it's comparing the logic model to different types of evaluation that we might do. So I just have the logic model up here because it's one of the forms of program development that we can use in extension. There are many out there, but the logic model is something that we're all pretty familiar with already. So when we look at the logic model and we compare it to the types of evaluations that we might conduct, and we can also get at some of the questions that we might ask in those different types of evaluations. The most important thing I think to remember, especially from this slide, is we need to have some type of program model planned. So you need to know the goals and objectives of your program, and what are those desired outcomes that you want from your program. And it's most important that we build our evaluation plan when we're building our program plan. So you don't wait till the end of the program and then decide, oh, what is it that I want to evaluate about this program? Because by that point, it's already a little bit too late and you're behind the 8 ball. So make sure you're developing those evaluations up front. So the types of evaluations that we could do, for example, over here on the left-hand side of a logic model, we're looking at the needs and the assets. What is it that we need? What does our community need? And what kind of programming can we deliver to meet those needs? And then we go over here on the left-hand side. So impact evaluation. To what extent can changes be attributed to our program? What are the final consequences of our program? Is the program worth the resources that it costs? So those are the types of evaluation. So how are we going to know that we've accomplished our program objectives and outcomes? Because remember I said it's important to make sure that you know what your program objectives are before you start delivering that program. And then what are those desired outcomes? So how are we going to know that this program has accomplished those goals? Typically, we call those indicators, or indicators of success. So this is the evidence that I talked about at the very beginning. We have some type of evidence that we're assigning some judgment to that gets at the program evaluation. So you could have multiple indicators to show success of a program or a particular aspect of that program. They might be quantitative or they might be qualitative. We dug really deep into qualitative basically evaluation and needs assessment last week. So this week we're gonna, our emphasis is gonna be on more quantitative. So here's some example indicators. So if one of the outcomes that we wanna see from our program is an increased youth-adult partnership, then after the program is over, we might wanna indicate or look for indicators of how many boards have youth participation in them. And it might be a good idea too, because when we talk about outcomes, we're looking at, you see the word increased or reduction or improved. You need to have some kind of baseline measurement in some of these cases. So keep that in mind too when you're trying to evaluate. So if we were looking for a reduction in nitrogen and phosphorus rates, then we might measure the acres managed according to the BMP guidelines or the quality of conservation plans that are implemented. If we're looking for improved financial management, we might count the number of people and or families that have established a budget that are actually using their budget. So you can measure some type of behavior change too to see if, to get at an indicator of success of that program. Just remember that you always need to tie those indicators of success back to that theory of change or the program objectives and outcomes for that program. T, did you want to say a little bit more about this slide?
Yeah, I know this can sound really nerdy, but this is something I'm pretty passionate about when we work with program development and program evaluation. And I know it's one of those terms that gets thrown around, theory of change, program theory, without it really sometimes being tied back to the reality, the implementation of what we're trying to do. And the way I explain it is, if we're not grounded in some theory of change, for example, we know that the bigger the spectrum of fruits and vegetables that kids taste, the more likely they are, that they taste it, the more likely are that they will continue to eat it. Well, I've got the basics. The nutrition people are going to say, T, you didn't say that right. That's okay. That's a theory of change. So therefore, yeah. And that's based on research, right? So therefore, we are going to give opportunities for children to taste different and new fruits and vegetables. Therefore, we believe that they will then adopt more fruits and vegetables into their diets. So that's a theory that we hold. It's based on research, and that's what our program intervention is based upon. So there's a theory of change that's guiding our work. We don't go out with farmers, producers, and go, hey, just throw some pesticide and nutrition on your fields. we think that's going to be better. Yeah, you just use some of this fertilizer. I don't know, take a capful. All that's very precise. It's based on research. It's a theory of change. If you use nitrogen, this will happen. That's our theory of change. So that also holds true across all of our program areas. We know what we're doing because of that theory that's based in research. And we talk about that's what makes us so different. That's what makes us different from everybody else.
Okay, I think I'm going to turn it back over to you, T, right? You're going to start on the questionnaire design.
Yeah, and I think I've got my dual monitors this week set up too. So you stop sharing, I'll start sharing.
Yes.
I can't share.
Oh, because you're logged in as a guest.
Okay, so Debbie.
You should be okay. I just made you co-host.
All righty, here we go.
Try again.
There we go. All right. So you're seeing my screen, right, Jared? All right, there we go. So Debbie said last week, we did talk a lot about qualitative research. This week, we're turning and we're focusing more on quantitative research. But the reality is that as I get into talking about writing good survey questions or writing good questions, it doesn't matter if you're doing qualitative or if you're doing quantitative. You need to write good questions. So predominantly today, my head's going to be focused more on survey research. And of course, in survey research, we're using Qualtrics, which Debbie and Brian are going to be talking more about tomorrow. And I'm having my dual monitor problem again, which I thought I had solved. There we go. So as I said, we're gonna be talking about questionnaire design and really more about question design, and then we'll talk a little bit more about questionnaire and the order of questions in a survey. But the quote, I said this last week, and I'm going to say it again. Amy El-Hadi and I were talking last week, and as we were talking about qualitative research, and she said, you know, good questions equal good data. And I said, yep, that's what it's all about. So you want to have good questions. You don't want to ever be in a spot where you're going back looking at a survey, whatever form that may be in, and go, you know, that was a really bad question. And I'll give you an example. We ran a big needs assessment on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, 9 counties over there. It was predominantly quantitative. And in this case, we asked farmers to do, and it was mostly paper. We asked them to do some ranking, and we got back all kinds of different responses. We thought we had worded that question exactly correct. We had tested it. And the data was, I mean, some people ranked all of their things number 1, you know, like that was their priority. And we'd asked them to kind of do a 1, 2, 3. So we had to go back to the drawing board on that question and do some more work on it. So what is a good survey question? It produces the answers that give you meaningful and useful information about what we are trying to describe. You know, in the research world, then we're talking about validity. And then we can produce comparable information about many people, and that's what we're talking about, reliability. So that's why when you get a survey and it says, do not change these questions, like if you're working in collaboration in a group or you've developed something and you're sending it out for your colleagues to use, do not change these questions, because once you make a change in that question, then we're not able to compare reliably across that data. So good questions equal good data. Type of questions, structured questions, we got into this just a little bit last week. They provide a list of acceptable responses. You all know the types, you see them all the time. It's checklist, check all that apply, multiple choice, true, false, yes, no, scales, where we do very dissatisfied, dissatisfied, those types of scales. And then with open-ended questions, as Amy talked about last week, That allows respondents to answer in their own words. There's no predefined scale that we're asking them to use. So just general across the board guidelines for all questions. Use words that all respondents will understand. And I put in quotes here, plain language. And I think I have a reference on one of the slides. If you're not familiar with the plain language effort in government, it's actually, I think, just plainlanguage.gov. You can go and take a look there. But in all of our writing, we strive to be clear. You know, for those of us who've been trained in academic writing, that can be really hard sometimes because we want to use these official sounding words, or as my friend would call them, those SAT words. That's not what we're after. We're after, it's technical writing. We're after being as clear as possible when we write that question. In addition, we want to make the questions as specific as possible. And I'm going to give you some really good examples of that. And these examples that I'm giving you are taken from my real life experience. And you know, I still see these common mistakes made today. Keep the question structure simple. We're going to have an example of that. Those are like those double negative type. Remember those from school in the multiple choice, those double negative questions? Always hated those. And then being aware of biased and leading questions. And that's why doing a pre-test, getting somebody to look over your questions is always a good idea. I never write questions in isolation. I begin with what I like to call a straw man or a straw person. Here they are. Let's work on them. Usually spend a lot of time when I'm developing a survey to make sure that I've got that language correct, got it specific, not seeing bias and leading questions. So, oh yeah, although my plainlanguage.gov, there it is, example 1. So we want to use clear and plain language. So here's some examples. Use main instead of principal. Use about instead of regarding. Help versus facilitate. I like this one. People who live here versus occupants of this household. Providing healthcare, healthcare provision. Now, one thing I'll say, I want you to think of a couple, see if you can think of some examples of those that you see a lot that you think could be made a lot easier to understand. Another thing about writing surveys, writing survey questions, is that you're always, I'm trying to make it an attachment with the user, with the respondent, because I don't want that respondent to drop out of my survey. I want to keep them with me in that survey. So people who live here is much more friendly and to me, is establishing a better relationship with that potential respondent than occupants of this household, right? So I'll ask questions and I'll use your, you, things like that to make it personable. Can you guys think of got any examples? I don't have the chat up in front of me right now, but anything coming in?
Not yet.
Any plain language examples? Well, I'll tell you what, if you think about them while we're on here, you can type them in or break in and let us know what you thought of. But there's a lot out there, believe me. But be sure to look at that plainlanguage.gov.
I put the link in the chat box too.
Ah, thanks. I finally figured out why I'm using 2 monitors. I finally figured out a little technical issue here, and I'm so proud. I'll tell you all about it later. Example 2, be specific. Okay, in the past week, how many days did you eat any butter? Somebody pipe up and tell me what's weak about that question. Days. Kirsten said, what kind of butter? Yeah. Use butter for cooking, right? So in this specific example, this is better. Oh, we got the butter, we got the margarine going on now. In the past 7 days, right? So what, the first part of it, in the past week, well, what constitutes the past week? Is it starting from today, Monday, through last Monday? What am I really asking for? Here I'm asking in the past 7 days. So I want to be able to judge that. I want to be specifics. Not counting margarine or other butter substitutes. I just want to know how many times you ate butter. How many days did you eat any butter? Any butter. And Lisa, I think it was Lisa, you're right. I probably would, I think it was Lisa. Yes, I would go back. I would clarify butter in cooking as well. You're exactly right on that one. Okay. Please rate your level of satisfaction with the morning group session using a scale of extremely satisfied to extremely dissatisfied. Okay, let's look at what better is here. Please rate your level of agreement with each statement below about the morning session. And here we're really looking at specificity, right? So the reality is you could have been satisfied with materials, but dissatisfied with the content being relevant. Could have had great materials, but the content wasn't relevant. So here we're drilling down and we want to know exactly what it was that you were satisfied or dissatisfied about with the session. Now, I want to point out something here, and Debbie can argue with me, and anybody else can argue with me too. Because we go to the American Evaluation Association to have sessions on things like this. I do not agree with that neutral in the middle there. I am more of—
Neither do I.
Oh, good, Debbie.
It should say neither agree nor disagree.
Right.
Or take it out altogether and make people make a choice.
Exactly. And that's what we would call a forced choice question, right? I want to know, did you agree or did you disagree? And so I get a little bit of granularity and strongly agree, or disagree, strongly disagree. But the neutral doesn't tell me nothing. The neutral doesn't tell me anything. Neutral, you're neutral about what, right? So I don't use neutral, but I will tell you when something is not applicable, I will use not applicable. And I will put it at the end to say, oh, that's not applicable to me. So I'm more of a forced choice person. I'm after data. I want data. So I'm not going to let you slide through and just tell me neutral, 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 because it's easy to go down through something like that and go, geez, I can't make up my mind right now. Just click, 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 neutral, neutral, neutral. It really doesn't help me.
Yeah, if you give people a fence to sit on, they will sit on it.
Exactly. So I guess I'm I don't know, a mean question writer, maybe that's what I call it. So now Debbie and I don't have to go to AEA and fight over forced choice questions. So it's really good. All right. Example 3, avoid complex sentences. Let's read this one. In the past 12 months, since such and such date, how many times have you talked to a doctor or assistant about your health? Do not count any time you might have seen a doctor while you were a patient in a hospital, but count all other times you actually saw or talked to a medical doctor of any kind. Right? Now, that's not an easy question to read. And if you're dealing oftentimes, and we always need to be mindful of this, where literacy levels are varied, again, you want to make it simple and easy to understand. So, better. In the past 12 months, to such and such a date, how many times have you talked to a doctor or assistant about your health? Okay, that's one question. Okay, now, thinking about those times you talked to a doctor or assistant about your health, how many occurred while you were a patient in the hospital? So you're helping the user out there. You're helping them cognitively think through this. And you know, it's exactly what you do in your work as educators. When you're teaching or you're presenting material, you're taking the same kinds of approaches to help your users understand. And that's what we do in surveys as well. Avoid double-barreled questions. Do you feel better after taking the procedure and taking the medication? What's the problem?
That's two questions put in one.
Absolutely. And so if the person answered yes or no, how would I know whether it was the procedure or the medication, right? It's two questions. So better. Did you feel better after the procedure? You know, yes, no, if it's yes, no question. Do you feel better after taking the medication? It's two questions. One of the things that if you use Qualtrics for a survey and you do a review, a check, which Qualtrics does automatically now, it will flag anytime it sees and or in a question, it will flag and say, is this a question that needs to be two questions? And it's really helpful with that. Example 5, avoid double negative questions. This is the one I referenced earlier. These are the ones I hated on multiple choice tests, right? Where you sit there and you go, oh, okay, what are they asking? Do you oppose not allowing unions for public employees? So it's a double negative. Cognitively, you've got to walk through that question. Better, do you support or oppose unions for public employees? And then I would have a checkbox that would say something like, I support unions for public employees. I oppose unions for public employees. Okay. This is an example of a biased questions. I have seen these quite a bit in my career. Do you think that the 2017 conference offered a better variety of breakout session topics than last year? What makes that biased?
I think the presenter has already taken a stand that the 2071 is better.
You're exactly right, Godwin. That's perfect phrasing. I love that. The questioner has already taken a stand in that. Do you think that it offered a better variety? So better would be, overall, how do you feel about the 2017 conference breakout session options compared to last year's options? Okay, that could be here's an example of where this could be an open-ended question, where I'm going to let them put it in their words versus I could have a scale there. Now, I didn't have this, but let me talk about this right now. What would lead you to make a choice to make that a closed-ended questions with a scale there versus an open-ended question? What might you be thinking about? Godwin?
I'm thinking maybe a Likert scale.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but I'm just thinking that you can put in a Likert scale.
Yep.
For them to rate them separately.
Yeah. Yeah, you're exactly right.
You could ask it as a satisfaction scale if you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And why are you comparing it to 2017 would be another question that I'd be asking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the way I was kind of going with that, I often, when I'm doing survey research, questionnaires, I am very careful about the number of open-ended questions that I put in it. So if you get a questionnaire,
You're right.
right, with 10 open-ended questions, you know, even me, I'm like, ugh, I don't think I'm going to do that. So when I can, I would make this a closed-ended question, and I would put a scale with it. That helps me in my data analysis because I can do some more counting. I can do perhaps some more statistical work with it versus leaving this question as open-ended. So that's part of what you want to think about when you're thinking about open-ended questions versus closed-ended questions. Now, this to me would be a nice question at the end of a survey, perhaps, kind of when we're saying, do you have any other comments? Is there anything else you'd like to tell me? Overall, how do you feel about it? Certainly, you know, I'll have a couple of those open-ended questions. But you've got to gauge both from the user's perspective, the burden on the user to answer that question, versus, and also about the burden on you for the data analysis piece. Oh, yeah, good answer. So how much did you enjoy the workshop? Again, that's a leading question. As Godwin said, I've already predetermined that you enjoyed the workshop. I'm asking you now, how much did you enjoy it, right? So that's a leading question. To what degree, if at all, were you satisfied with the workshop? And there I would have a scale. Here's another example of a leading question. How valuable has the past event been in helping you gain knowledge about general farm business management? I've already determined, I'm telling you it was valuable. That bar set. Now I'm just asking you how valuable. I'm not really giving you the option to say it wasn't valuable, right? I want to know how valuable. So it's a leading question. Okay. The way to correct that, how would you rate the past event in helping you gain knowledge about general farm business management? And again, put the Likert type scale with that one. So let's talk a little bit about asking questions about facts. And you might say, well, aren't all questions about facts? But here in this specific case, we're talking about demographic questions, questions for reporting of what people have done or what's happened to them, and questions for what people do or how they lead their lives. So these are fact-based questions, right? So example one, how far back, this is a fact question, during the current school year, how often have you asked questions or contributed to course discussions? Better, again, just like the one that we had before, during the last 7 days, we're telling them we want to know in a specific time period. This is one of my favorite examples that I like to use with people, and I will tell you what, I would like to think that was all my brain work that did this, but I have to give credit to my good colleague at University of Maryland Eastern Shore, Baron Rogers. We were working on a survey together of the, Maryland holds a small farm conference each year. I think Ohio does too. And we were looking at a survey that was going across people who had attended that small farm conference for, I think, about the past 5 years. And so we were going to ask them, what year did you attend the small farm conference? And so if you're like me and you have your professional association conferences or others, you go, gosh, what year was it that we were in Cleveland? What year was it that we were in Minnesota? So our problem here that we were concerned about was recall. So what we did, and Baron came up with this idea, and I loved it. We put in here, each year the University of Maryland Eastern Shore Small Farm Program hosts an annual small farm conference. To the best of your ability, in what years have you attended the event? And what Baron said to me is, T, they will remember by who the keynote speaker was. So, oh yeah, I attended the year that Joe Norman was the keynote speaker. Oh yes, I attended the year that Howard Leathers was the keynote speaker. So we used pictures there to aid in recall. Also used a picture in another survey that we did, an IP and vegetable survey, where the specialist wanted to ask if the educators used, I don't know, it was something like EB 142356. It was a really big publication that all the, a lot of the educators used. But I said to Jerry, what in the world is EB 123456? And will they remember it when you say it? Will they remember it by that name? It's like, well, I'm not sure, but if I put the picture of the cover in it, they will know exactly what EB 123456 is. So we did a little snapshot and we put the cover of that publication in there, and that was great for aiding in recall as well. Again, definitions and specificity. In the last week, did you exercise? I might say yes to that, by the way, and that might my definition of exercise might be different than Amy Kay's. So better. During the last 7 days, did you exercise or participate in any physical activity for at least 20 minutes? That's the specificity there, for 20 minutes, that made you sweat and breathe hard, such as basketball, soccer, running, swimming, bicycling, or similar activities. So we're giving the user some parameters around that fact-based question. I see this is a mistake that I still see a lot. For instance, when did you move to Ohio? And I'm going to say the mistake is not this particular question. The mistake is this type of question. Okay, so when did I move to Ohio? Well, we got here on December 30th, 2019. So do I say December? Or do I say 2020 because it was almost 2020? So, or do I just say December, or do I just say 2019? So if I'm wanting the year, then I ask specifically, in what year did you move to Ohio? Not interested in the month. If I wanted to know the month, I could ask, in what month did you move to Ohio? And in what year did you move to Ohio? Do not include vague responses. I tell you what, we could fight about scales too with this one. During the past 7 days, how often have you asked questions or contributed to course discussions in other ways? So the scale there is very often, sometimes never, better. So we're going to put some numbers with the scale, right? So what does very often mean? What does often mean? Sometimes never. During the last 7 days, how often have you asked questions, etc.? None, 1 to 2 times, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, more than 6. So you can see the example there where if you think about reporting, when you're talking, when you're giving the results of your questions, you want to be able to say, well, we know that within 7 days, students have usually asked questions 1 to 2 times per week, right? That gives some specificity. Okay, keep answers mutually exclusive. I still see this one happen, although it's an old one. You see there under 25, 25 to 35, 35 to 45. So what is my problem? I've got some overlapping categories. So it should be like this. And I'll tell you, it's an easy mistake to make. I always watch myself on these types of questions to make sure that I'm not overlapping. So you see here, 25 to 35 really should be 25 to 34. And then it goes 35 to 44. So be careful with those kinds of things. Again, it can really mess up your data analysis. This one's a little bit more, I'm not sure what the right word is, but I'll show it to you, then you can tell me. What materials have you used since this workshop? Check all that apply. Versus, what materials, I know my word now, it's a little bit more nuanced. What materials have you used since the workshop? Whoops. So what I'm doing in this question, Remember when I said that neutral option down the center? It's easy for people to get a little bit lazy and slap happy with their clicker and just go tick, 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 right? Well, separating this out into a yes/no question slows the user down. It's easy for me to, on that left-hand side, to run down that list and just check, 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 right? Versus over here on the right, it's slowing me down a little bit. It's asking me, did you use the insulated bag? Yes or no. Did you use the magnet? Yes or no. So sometimes we do want to slow the user down and have them, that we know they're really thinking about it. They're not just check, check, checking. It's a little bit of a nuanced question there. Questions about attitudes. We're seeking to get information about perceptions, feelings, opinions of others. So I want to talk to you about this because I still see this problem, and oftentimes when I explain it, it's kind of a little bit like a light bulb that goes off for people, and it's an unbalanced scale. And again, this kind of goes back to almost to a leading. You could say it's leading, and I'll explain that. Please rate the service you received today. Whoops. Excellent, very good, good, average, and poor. Somebody tell me, what's the problem? Why am I calling that an unbalanced scale?
I think the first rate sounds the same thing, but the other two stands out.
There are three positive choices, right, Godwin?
Yes.
There are three positive choices. Then there's that average and there's poor. What is the likelihood that I'm more likely to pick a positive response on the scale? I've really got 4 opportunities to say that the service was not bad, right? Or I've got 4 opportunities to say that the service was on that positive side of the scale. It was either excellent, very good, good, or average. There's only one poor, right? So it's like odds. It's likely, the odds are in the favor that I'm going to give you a positive response, right? So let's look at it if it's a balanced scale. I've got 2 positive responses, excellent and good. And then I've got average right there in the middle. And in that case, Debbie, I could live with that on that 5-point because that makes sense to me, right? And then poor and very poor. So you see, I put the boxes around so that you can see the balance on those. Yep, Debbie said yes, she agrees with me on that too. Yeah, Emily got it. Not many choices if not pleased. That's exactly right. Okay, so that's an unbalanced scale. I'm going to give you another one. How satisfied or dissatisfied are you with the overall service? So you see on the left, I've got 3 answers that are basically satisfied. So when I'm doing my data analysis, if I have to begin to aggregate that data together, I've got more data. Let's say if I'm just going to talk about people who are overall satisfied, there's more probability that I'm going to have people choose one of those answers because there's 3 of them versus 2 of somewhat dissatisfied. That's the balance that's going on there. So you see in the example on the right, I've balanced my scale out. It's a 6-point scale now. Any questions about that?
You did take away the neutral response on the right. Well, you don't have it on either side, but compared to the last question.
Yeah, I don't have neutral at all. Okay. So, do you work out on a regular basis? Well, we've got, this is a trick question for you. So here's my question. Do you work out on a regular basis? Okay. At least 7 times a week, 4 to 6 times a week, 1 to 3 times a week, not at all. What's wrong with this?
I think this is a yes or no question.
Thank you, Godwin, yay. Yes, it's a yes/no question, and I see it a lot where people ask a yes/no question, and then they'll put a scale to it versus yes or no. So if I want that scale, I would be asking about frequency. How often do you work out during a 7-day period? And then there's a scale. This is a yes/no question. I see this all the time, and I will tell you too, I do it myself. I have to watch myself. It's a very easy mistake to make. Okay. Response category should match the question type. Do leadership trainings help you feel prepared for community organizing? Extremely prepared. Prepared, slightly prepared, not at all prepared. Same problem. It's a yes/no question. Do leadership trainings help you feel prepared for community organizing? I didn't ask you how prepared. I asked you a yes/no question. So the proper scale is yes, maybe, no, I don't know, which is oftentimes when I'm using scales versus like that neutral. If it's a possibility where somebody doesn't know, I'll use the option of I don't know, or something like not sure, because sometimes people don't like to admit that they don't know. So here are just some other response categories or some other response category considerations for you. Generally, we're talking about 5 to 7 or 4 to 6. Again, I tend to, as much as possible, like to keep it simple. I like to keep a forced choice generally on a 4-point scale. You got to think through when does it make sense to get more granular on that scale. Now this is start with positive, and so that's the extremely satisfied to the extremely dissatisfied. I'll tell you sometimes I do switch that up. I'm not going to get into why about that today, but generally start with the positive. Seems to be slightly less burdensome. I will also tell you in Qualtrics, my colleague and I at Maryland, Chinzi did some research on this, and the research still shows that it's better to go horizontal with your categories than go vertical. And I don't know all the research behind that, but it's about, Debby might know that, but it's about the ability of the user to process the information. If you have a don't know, does not apply, place it at the end of the scale. Again, we talked about the balance scale having an equal number of positive and negative categories, and using other when appropriate. Qualtrics does a nice job with that because then people can type in what their other is. Sensitive questions. How many of you go to the doctor and they ask you like, do you use illegal drugs? I often think, who's going to answer that? Okay, I mean, who's going to say, oh yes, by the way, I do. But when you're asking sensitive questions in a survey, there are ways that you can do it that makes it less threatening. Like, here's an example. I'm not going to read through all of this, but it's, you know, how many drinks did you have altogether yesterday versus days when you have anything alcoholic to drink. How many drinks do you usually have? So there are ways we can wordsmith that to make it a little bit more gentle for the user. There's some more examples of being specific. On days when you drink alcohol, we're not saying you drink alcohol every day, right? It's sounding accusatory. And again, the way that you can make your survey good is have your colleagues review it. You can do focus groups as you're developing your questions. You can do some pre-testing. My colleague Shannon and I, we brought farmers and producers actually into the office on our big needs assessment surveys because it was so huge. It involved so much work. It was a long survey, and we wanted to make sure that they would stick with it. And we did kind of a cognitive interviewing. But I mean, if you've got a survey that's, I don't want to say, it's not long, it's short, you're just going out to get some information really quick, have your colleagues review it and give you good feedback. Again, we talked about open-ended questions, and you all know this. If you don't want to limit the answers, there's not a scale that you have. You don't know potentially what it could be. But I do like to have that open-ended question at the end of a survey. Please tell me anything else that I haven't asked you about. I do that in focus groups. I do that in key informant interviews often. Is there anything you want to tell me? Oh, Debbie's giving me hands up, thumbs up on me. Is there anything else you want to tell me that I haven't asked you about? One last thing I want to say about the organization of your survey questions. If we were in a face-to-face session, what I would do is I would come over and one of you, and I would say, I would come over and shake your hand. I go, hi, Emily, nice to meet you. What's your race? What's your ethnicity? How old are you? Right? When you're thinking about demographic questions, that's the reason we're not doing that generally up front in a survey. If you think about the survey as a conversation, you don't walk up to people and start asking them that kind of information. You're building some rapport with your user, right? You're going, oh, it's kind of like an icebreaker, some easy questions that get you into the conversation. And I used to, when I was designing surveys, and I would always sit with Qualtrics or whatever package I was using, pen and paper, and I would be like talking to the user in my head. And I always thought, man, that's probably kind of weird. But I went to a workshop that Don Dillman did, and it's been quite a few years back when he was still teaching, and he's the survey guru. And Don Dillman said, think of it as a conversation in your head that you're having with the user. And I thought, oh man, I'm vindicated. Oh, it's good. So I do think about it like that. And there's some other points there. And one point that I want to make, and Debbie, Debbie's made some of these points, and I'm going to ask her to, if there's anything else that she wants to say. But several years ago too, I was in a workshop with Michael Quinn Patton. He's another evaluation guru, and it was on qualitative research. And he said in that workshop, your evaluation is a teaching opportunity. So when I develop surveys, I'm always thinking that what I'm saying in those questions is reinforcing something. It's a teaching opportunity for me. Not that I'm doing leading questions or biased questions, but what can the user leave this maybe having learned, or there is some benefit to the user. So I like to think about that. Debbie, anything else you want to say about those final thoughts?
I don't think so, but I see a question that Godwin asked in the chat box. So Godwin, something that our IRB here at Ohio State is kind of picky about is the use of the word pilot. If you are using the term pilot tests, then they are going to consider that research. So you need to be careful with that. I think what she was referring to when she was talking about pre-testing. So if you built for example, if you built a survey in Qualtrics, what I like to do is send it out to like Jared and T and some people in the LOD unit. So these are people that aren't going to be responding to the survey, but they can answer questions about whether the survey flow is correct, whether I'm asking the correct questions, that type of thing. So I think that's what he meant, and maybe you could
yeah,
clarify.
Absolutely, Debbie. Nope, that's perfect.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, another shameless commercial again this week. It's the same from last week. I authored the E-Extension Evaluation Matters version 1.0 or 1.1, and there's the address for it. We are getting ready to begin the development of version 2, where we'll be adding to it, but it's there as a resource in E-Extension for you as well. So that's it. Questions, comments? Everybody ready to write some questions? What? No, Jared.
It was a question, though.
Was that your question, Jared?
That's Jared's question.
I'm with you, Jared. Great question.
And be sure to join us tomorrow, next 2 days, actually, for sure. when Brian and Debbie are going to be delving into more of the great specific kind of advanced features in Qualtrics. The three of us are talking about it. We just got so excited. So you can come nerd out with us. And then Thursday, we're going to have some great evaluation examples from the field. And then on Friday, Brian Raisin is going to be talking about storytelling with your data. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Godwin.